Patriots. This is Shady Groove. Hope everyone is well today. I wanted to do this video. We're going to do a deep dive into the constitutional sheriffs, and I wanted to explain and define and go over a lot of this information that we as Patriots think is very important to our future as America. We have to understand that we are standing up in a time where not a lot of other people are standing up, and that is a big deal. And all of us coming together in the Q movement, backing the president and backing your country and standing against Marxism, communism, whatever you want to call it, we have to remember our power. As Americans, we have been misguided by our educational systems. We have been taught things that are inaccurate, and we have been told things that are extremely inaccurate about your system of government, common law, the power of the sheriff, and many other things, as most of you out there already know. And so for this video, we're going to watch a bit of Sheriff Mack and his presentation of the power of the sheriff. We're going to watch these videos here together, and then we're going to go into a deeper explanation of what the sheriff means, and as well as all the links to the stuff that I cover here, I'm going to put in the description below on the video. So thanks everyone for joining me. I would like for anyone out there who thinks that you are somehow silenced or not able to speak to rethink your position on that, and I'm going to try to give you some tools here so that we can start to interface with our county sheriffs. Remember, there is a difference between a constitutional sheriff and a sheriff. They're not all on our side. So part of this operation is for us to understand how, when, and what our sheriffs are doing, and to get better acquainted with the system by which we elect them and get to know them on a personal level. That is going to be a big part of this whole QAnon movement, in my opinion, is for Americans to rise up and start to communicate with law enforcement. I think with the stuff that we're seeing with defund the police and this agitation that's going on out there, most of us know that this is a Marxist revolution, and they are coming for our institutions and the things that we hold dear and sacred. So with that, I would like to play this video, and then we're going to move into some more in-depth stuff. So sit back and enjoy, and don't hesitate to post some questions below on the video if you have any. Thank you very much. Let's check this out.
My name is Richard Mack, and I'm the former sheriff of Graham County, Arizona. The county sheriff is the only elected law enforcement officer in the United States, and certainly in his county. So he's the only official that reports directly to the power source. In other words, he's not a bureaucrat. He wasn't appointed by some other body. He reports directly to we, the people. And so he is sovereign in that regard because he reports directly to the other sovereigns. And that's why the sheriff is the ultimate authority. He's not a bureaucrat from Washington, D.C. The President of the United States cannot tell your sheriff what to do. And so certainly none of the other auxiliary departments underneath the President can tell the sheriff what to do, and that includes the IRS, the EPA, OSHA, FBI, DEA. Any of those agencies cannot tell the sheriff what to do. But when they're in his sovereign jurisdiction, he can tell them what to do. The question is, will he? It's really alarming how many peace officers, policemen, law enforcement officers, sheriffs, chiefs of police, who have actually taken an oath of office to uphold and defend, protect and preserve the United States Constitution. And then when you present them with that thought or idea that that's exactly what they should be doing, they claim that it isn't their job to uphold and defend the Constitution, that which they've already sworn an oath to do. And so that's what really I find very disturbing. but I think it's the evolution that has taken place in our country today, and also it's a result or a consequence or a branch of what's wrong with America. America is off track. We have replaced our Constitution, which was the bulwark of our freedom in this country, with political agendas, political selfishness, and ultimately political correctness has replaced our Constitution. And so is it any wonder that we're so far off track? And my message is law enforcement owns part of that problem, and we need to correct it. Now, the governor and the sheriff are pretty much equal. The governor is the sovereign leader over the state. The sheriff would probably supersede the governor within his county because he is the ultimate protector of the people within his jurisdiction. He can't let anybody violate the Constitution in his county. He cannot allow anyone to violate the rights of the people within his jurisdiction. It doesn't matter if it's the governor, the president, the IRS, FBI. He is in charge of protecting the constitutional freedoms of his jurisdiction. The governor, yeah, oversees the state, and she is, or he, very powerful, and they are equal in some ways and have the same responsibility to the people who elect them, and that is to uphold and defend their Constitution. I was probably the first sheriff in the United States to sue the federal government for doing that very thing, for promulgating a bill or law or statute that directly commandeers the sheriff for federal bidding. As I look back, you know, I'm really grateful that we won a case at the United States Supreme Court, and I still have yet to see if throughout American history that there's been another case won at the Supreme Court by a sheriff, by a sitting sheriff. Sheriff Prince and I ended up taking this case all the way to the Supreme Court. We won on this very issue of state sovereignty, local autonomy, and the power of the county. And so when the or any other legislative body passes a law, a supposed law, that forces the sheriff to violate his oath of office to protect and defend the Constitution, what does he do? And Judge Roll, in my case, actually said that Sheriff Mack is thus forced to choose between keeping his oath or obeying the act. And I think he nailed it right on the head there. That's the key question. What does all of law enforcement and what do all the sheriffs across the country do when a statute forces them to violate their constitutional oath? Well, I think it's easy. You keep your word to your oath. That's the ultimate law. The supreme law of the land is the Constitution. Nothing supersedes the Constitution. So let's put it back in its proper place. And I would say there was a sheriff from Montana that did not join the lawsuit who I agree with. He did it the right way. He just said no. He said, we're not doing the Brady bill in this county. And that was, I believe, Sheriff Nixon. And as I look back, I wish that that's what we had done. After looking back at my lawsuit and the subsequent victory in the U.S. Supreme Court, that I wish the sheriffs in Arizona had simply all signed a letter unitedly and sent it back to Washington, D.C., to the White House, and CC it over to the Congress and the Justice Department, letting them know we're not doing the Brady bill in Arizona, and thank you very much for your efforts, but it won't be applied here. Yeah, that was a very powerful case, disavowed by the judge in the case, by the way, but it was a requirement of the settlement in the case that Sheriff Mattis devise a way to make sure that the federal government couldn't come in and do what they did to the Castañeda family, trying to arrest them. Well, they did arrest them at 1 o'clock in the morning for being illegal immigrants. And of course, nobody's trying to do that now when we have them all over the place, but the thing of it was, the Castañedas required that as part of their settlement. And Dave Mattis actually came up with the idea, and they were obeying it. The federal government was obeying it, and other counties in Wyoming also practiced the same policy. It wasn't a law, but it was a policy as established through a court order, or a court settlement, I should say. I don't believe they're doing it too much now. And so we've got a lot of work to do. Well, first thing I would love to see it be the county commissioners. The county commissioners should be supporting their sheriff with proper legislation or resolutions to have him enforce the Constitution. So if they pass a law saying, federal government, let's say they have this H.R. 45 that Barack Obama's trying to shove down our throats right now, to have a national registry for firearms and firearm owners in this country, and to have a national licensure granted from Washington, D.C. to keep and bear arms, which is already guaranteed in the Second Amendment. Let's say that that is really going to be pushed, and the federal government is going to come out and perhaps confiscate weapons and or ammunition. So what does the local authority do? Well, the county commission passes a resolution saying that there will be no more federal gun control in this county, and the sheriff enforces it. And so when the feds come in, the sheriff stands. He shouldn't need that resolution, but it would be nice to have it, because the Second Amendment is there, and he's already sworn, we're back to that again, he's already sworn an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution, and the Bill of Rights, of which the Second Amendment is a part, is a key integral part of the freedom as established by our founders. And why was the Second Amendment put there in the first place? Well, that's what we need to all understand. The intent of the Founding Fathers on the Second Amendment was so that the people of this country would have the final say in controlling their government. And the ultimate power of the Second Amendment is that the people remain in charge to be able to fight off abusive government. That's why the Second Amendment's there. So yeah, and the other one that really needs to back the sheriff in what's going on is the county attorney. It's not essential to have those others. The sheriff can do it on his own. He doesn't need to ask permission of anybody in the county or across the country. He doesn't need to ask the barber down on Main Street or anyone else how he's going to keep his oath of office. He's bound by his word, and he's also bound by the Constitution.
Okay, very interesting there regarding the Constitution and the sheriff and the powers that they have. And also, remember all of the oaths that you guys have taken. You've taken the oath. You've been deputized into this movement.
Department of Homeland Security should have absolutely nothing to do with your sheriff's office. Absolutely, let me say that again, absolutely nothing. Okay, Homeland Security has just been around for a few years, since 9/11, of course, and right now we have Janet Napolitano, who used to be the governor of Arizona, saying that veterans and people who believe in Ron Paul and people who believe in the Constitution and people who believe in the Bible and who believe in gun rights are all dangerous and pose some sort of danger to the federal government. Well, I guess she might be right. If the government's out of control and tyrannical and abusive, well, yeah, then she ought to be worrying, I guess. But otherwise, these people and those groups are extremely peaceful. And she even mentioned, I think, the libertarians, which all libertarians have to swear an oath of non-aggression and non-violence. So how did they make that list? The sheriff shouldn't be taking money from the feds in the first place, and then they don't have to worry about that. And if the states would wake the heck up, and I really do mean wake the heck up, if they would stop sending our money to Washington, D.C., then Washington, D.C. won't have our money to hold over us anymore. So it's just, I don't know, maybe it's all too simple, but federal government doesn't create money, they take money. And they take money from the states and from the people. So why do the states sit here and worry about every $10 they send to Washington, D.C., they get $1 back? Well, keep your $10 and you won't have to worry about any of that. Yeah? Well, the citizens are the boss of the sheriff, and so they need to let the sheriff know what they want him to do. Even then, if 99.9% of the people in his county ask him to violate the Constitution, he can't do it. No matter what, he has to keep his word. This is not a democracy. In a democracy, that would be okay. The rule of the majority would win out. That's democracy. In a constitutional republic, the rights of the individual, even if it's just one person in his county, must be protected. And so the people form, the M word, the militia, or the posse. And if you look up the word militia in the dictionary, Google the definition of militia. It's the same thing as the local posse, which the sheriff has had the power to call out the people and actually order the people to come out in helping him in the execution of the law and keeping the peace. And that's where the people really come out. Back to your question about how can citizens support their sheriffs? Well, he works for you. You've got to read this and then take it to him and say, you know what? There was a sheriff who sued the federal government and won a case on the issue of states' rights. We'd like you to consider this. And it's only 50 pages, so he can read this while he eats a donut. Yeah.
Did you see that?
Hey, I was in law enforcement 20 years, I know. The MIAC report was absolutely absurd. Anyone thinking that that's okay has got a screw loose somewhere, and they call us crazy. Well, we mean no other individual on the face of the planet any harm. This is a peaceful movement. This is a movement to restore our Constitution, yes, and we will stand fast in that, and we're not going to move backward for anybody. But we mean no harm to absolutely anyone else. We don't want to hurt anybody. We certainly don't want a fight or a war or anything of that nature, but we're not giving up our guns, and we're not giving up our ammunition, and we're not giving up our children, and we're not giving up our religions, and we're certainly not going to give up any more of our freedom and liberty. And if you really study what's going on in our country, you'll come face to face with the conclusion that I put also in the book, The County Sheriff, America's Last Hope, the best book on the planet right now about freedom, that every citizen in this country should read.
I agree.
The bottom line of this whole book is that it presents this thesis of the book that the greatest threat to constitutional, God-given American liberty is our own federal government. The worst thing that can happen in this country is for a county sheriff to be corrupt. They're really hard to remove, and because he is corrupt, he has lots of people in his pocket, or he's in other people's pockets. I don't think that happens an awful lot, but I know for a fact that it does happen, and it is happening now. So some states don't even have recall laws. The only way he can be removed in some states if you convict him of a felony. Well, that's happened a few times. There are recall laws, and I suggest people use them, or you find a place to live with a sheriff who is honest and keeps his oath of office. But to the sheriffs who are corrupt, luckily it's a small percentage. But what we need all sheriffs to do is to come to the realization that the oath of office is their ultimate goal and purpose and duty. And if you're just going to take the oath as a ceremony to get your picture in the paper at the beginning of your term, then you've violated the Constitution. and you violated your oath of office, and you violated the trust of the people. A recall is just a signature drive where people in the county sign a petition to have another election. And the sheriff still is on that ballot, or any other corrupt elected official is still on that ballot, but it puts them up for another election and gives the people another chance to kick them out. The Real ID Act is one of many coming out down the pike in Washington, D.C. Let's go back a little bit too to the Second Amendment. The Second Amendment does bestow, without question, and it would take any high school student maybe 5 minutes to find the intent of the Founding Fathers. They would have to try to go find it because they're not taught the Second Amendment and from the intent of the Founding Fathers in schools. I've been a government teacher in high school before, and I know it does not teach the truth. Most of the government books in this country school system do not teach the truth about our foundation or about our government or about the Founding Fathers. But there's a lot of information out there, and you can find it. But the federal government's trying to force more gun control down our throats. They're trying to force this national ID down our throats. That's going to have also a part to play with gun control. And I simply don't trust any of it. But the overall socialistic agenda that is saturating Washington, D.C. politics right now, it's all unconstitutional. Government is not here to feed us, to clothe us, to take care of us, to educate us, to basically take care of us. And let me warn you, friends, if you want the federal government to take care of you, they will. And that should scare you to death. But the National ID Act, all that stuff, H.R. 45, the bottom line is that there's already about 22,000 gun control laws in this country, all of which are unconstitutional. Every one of them. The people have the right to keep and bear arms, and what gun I own, and how I get it, and how much ammo I have, or how many guns I have. Guess what? I don't want to be rude here, but it's none of your business, and it certainly is none of my government's business. The sheriff can refuse any order or policy or suggestion or law or anything else from Washington, D.C. or from the state capitol if it violates the rights of the people. He is the ultimate check and balance. And he usually has a gun. Freedom of the press, freedom, free speech, it's all combined together. And a lot of times these same groups that have been attacked are the ones that are the most vocal. So that's why Janet Napolitano's coming after them, because they have to label you as something so people won't listen to you. And of course, who jumps on board on that attack? Well, it's usually ABC and CBS and NBC and CNN and what are these government-owned media outlets? The reason that we have freedom of the press is not so we can read about LeBron James in the sports page of the newspaper. It's so that the press actually is a check and balance against overzealous government also, to make sure that the people will always hear the truth about what's really going on. Well, that's not happening anymore.
Okay, so you see there a lot of what he's saying, talking about our system of government and the power of your sheriff. Your sheriff in your county is the president, the elected president of your county. He has the power to refuse any order. He has the power to refuse any forfeiture order or anything else. They just don't realize it or are complacent. So with all of this stuff, remember, like we're watching this video right now, it's from 2009. It is completely relevant to what we're doing with the Q movement and waking people up to their power. Q has said you have forgotten your power. This is part of what he means by you have forgotten your power. You've forgotten how to fight. You've forgotten what it means to stand up. And this is why I wanted to provide everyone some more tools as we move through this. Here's part 3.
Yeah, they've actually done some of that in the past. I think it was the Wetlands Act back in the 90s, and there was a big rain in somebody's ranch or something, and it formed a little pond, and the government came in and took over this guy's land because there was a pond on his land now. There's been so many ridiculous things. The Endangered Species Act has caused a lot of stupidity from Washington, D.C. The EPA has done a lot of stupid things in the name of supposedly protecting our environment. Cost a lot of jobs. If you want to see where most jobs have been lost in this country in the last 20 years, put it right at the doorstep of the EPA. And the Wetlands Act, and now that they think they own all the water, Governor Symington back in the 90s also showed the federal government when they couldn't balance their budget, and there was no budget for a while when Bill Clinton was in office. Well, Governor Symington said, well, fine, we don't need you guys. We'll run our own Grand Canyon. It's ours anyway. We don't need you guys running our Grand Canyon. Well, it's the same principle. The governors of this state, of every individual state, and then the sheriffs and county boards of commission and board of supervisors need to let the federal government know, you don't own the water in this state. This is a sovereign state. We are in charge within the borders of this state. We are in charge, not you. The states created you. You do not supersede the creator. The federal government didn't even exist when we started the Revolutionary War. It was formed afterwards. So when we fought for freedom, it was for state sovereignty, not for a strong central government. One place where Alexander Hamilton was wrong. The 10th Amendment is the basis of my lawsuit. The 10th Amendment is where it guarantees the power and sovereignty to the states or to the people, which also shows the power the people have. And to paraphrase the 10th Amendment, this is really what the 10th Amendment says. It's the Founding Fathers telling all future generations of government, especially in Washington, D.C., that just in case you want to get really creative, or if you think we forgot something, you can't do that either. That's the 10th Amendment. Well, usually you can be certain if Washington, D.C.'s passed another law, it's going to cost taxes and jobs. And then they'll turn around and create a welfare state for those people to collect more benefits and entitlements. It's absolutely amazing that the icon of the Democratic Party was John F. Kennedy, and he said, ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Anybody remember that principle? Anywhere in government, show me a Democrat. Even and a Republican for that matter in Washington, D.C. that believes that principle. Government is not here to take care of us. Government is here to protect our borders. Oh, man, they've done a bang-up job there. But no, it's so off. It's so opposite of what it was intended to be that it's absolutely scary. Well, first of all, he has the duty to protect the businesses that are offering alternative health to citizens. Those businesses have a right to exist. Let me, for the record, make this very clear. I use them. Right now, if you look at the evidence, doctors killed by making mistakes of prescriptions and other mistakes, about 125,000 people a year. Guns supposedly are only involved in about 20,000 such deaths. Why aren't we registering doctors or going after doctors? But no, we've actually strengthened the FDA and given the FDA more power, and they don't have any power to begin with, but they keep stealing it and usurping it. But they're actually going after some of these herbal companies or whole food companies. Most of these alternative supposed medications are simply whole foods. They're just concentrated. And I use them all the time, and so does my wife and family. And we will continue to do so. And for anyone to say that these companies should be shut down so that we can have more chemotherapy and more drugs shoved down our throat, like Prozac and Zoloft and all these other things that are destroying our children, is ridiculous. The sheriff is not a puppet for the courts or for the legislatures. He is his own boss. Again, who does he report to? He reports to the people. And he has to weigh that above all other elected officials or public officials who are going after a citizen in his county. Doesn't matter if it's the IRS or a judge or whatever. The judge cannot expect and should not expect the sheriff to go along with an unconstitutional order. In fact, no one, not the military or law enforcement, can be held accountable for disobeying an unlawful order. Oath Keepers! Yeah, Oath Keepers has been around for only about 2 or 3 months, and I got to know Stuart Rhodes and Dave Freeman with Oath Keepers, and the relationship that we have is an obvious one and an easy one. I've been preaching about the oath of office for about 20 years, and now they've made it a national campaign. And I'll tell you what, when I was in Lexington and we had the oath ceremony where we all, about a crowd of about 400 citizens, law enforcement, retired military, current military, all of us joining together, raising our arms and taking an oath, or retaking or reaffirming our oaths to uphold and defend the United States Constitution. I'll tell you what, it brought a tear to my eye. It was one of the most powerful moments I've ever participated in. You know, you can't contract out what the Army is supposed to do and what they're constitutionally supposed to be doing to protect, and then you kind of give carte blanche to a private company to do that which the military is supposed to be doing. You know, that really puts the government and the military in a precarious position, and we have seen what happens when you do that. Who do these people, a private company, who do they report to? You know, who's their boss? If they violate their contract, who's responsible? The government or that company? Or, you know, we get mad at them, or what do we do to them? Fire them, stop the contract, take the money back, sue them? All that stuff's not part of a military operation. It's the same thing with Andrews International or anybody else. They can work for private companies, but they shouldn't be hired by government. You know, they're a private company. Their allegiance is not to the American people or to the Constitution. Their allegiance is to make money. They're a private company, and I don't mind companies making money. I totally support the capitalist society that we're supposed to have. Capitalism works a lot better than socialism or communism. Well, I think the ultimate protection that the sheriff will give his people is from other government agencies that want to run roughshod over his people in his county. We saw what happened in Ruby Ridge, Idaho. We saw what happened in Waco when sheriffs stand back and trust the federal government. The federal government doesn't have a very good track record. The IRS has a horrible track record. So, you know, the last thing you want to do is trust government. In fact, Patrick Henry warned us that we should never trust government officials, but shackle them down with the parameters and chains of the Constitution, as he said. And Thomas Jefferson said that the price of freedom is eternal vigilance. And that's the ones that are supposed to be careful are us, we, the people. It's our government, it's what we do, this is us. And so we have got to be really careful. And the sheriff is the ultimate protector, again, of the people, to protect them from all enemies, both foreign and domestic. Doesn't matter where they come from. Okay? They come from Washington, D.C. or the State House or whatever. And so martial law and all this, the sheriff, if he's organized enough and has his posse ready to go, his armed posse ready to go anywhere in this country, then FEMA and those from the federal government who want to institute martial law, they can tell them, go somewhere else. There's not going to be enough manpower to do all this anyway. If they want to do martial law from Hawaii to Bangor, Maine, there's absolutely not enough manpower. It has to be local people. So the sheriffs are going to be asked to be part of the martial law. And the sheriffs can say, no thanks, go somewhere else. We don't need you here. We've got it under control. The sheriffs really have got to exercise some real leadership and planning on that one.
Okay, so I'm hoping you're getting a lot of the importance of this and why this is relevant. It isn't just the government agencies, but recognize that, or isn't just the Federal Reserve, but recognize that these other agencies within the government, the EPA, the FDA, the CDC, the FTC, FEMA, all of these are unconstitutional organizations that are running a scam to make you think that they have authority over you, but they actually do not. Our sheriffs are the buffer between us and them. And remember, just like he was saying there, the government does not provide you happiness. The Constitution says that you have the right to pursue happiness, and a lot of people get confused and think that that means they have the right to or that the government should be the ones making them happy, and that is not what we're talking about here. This is a completely backwards organized situation that we have in our system of government. They keep saying it's a democracy. We know that it is a republic. This is one of the main reasons that it is a republic. So let's continue on to part 4.
Well, Sheriff Joe Arpaio from Phoenix, Arizona has already set that example for all of us. The last count, I think he has about 5,000 on his posse. When I was sheriff, I had about 125. Our search and rescue, our entire team was all posse members, all volunteers, and they were excellent. And we can exercise, the sheriff can exercise his authority to call out volunteers however he wants, and he can save the citizens a lot of money in doing so. UN troops being in the United States, even for little exercises, even for an exercise is something we should all be very concerned about. We had them in Arizona back when I was sheriff, and they weren't in my county, but they were in a neighboring county, and we got pictures of them and asked why they were there, and they said they were there on a peacekeeping mission. Well, I thought we were already at peace in Arizona and the United States. Why do we need the UN? Let me tell you right now, this mentality and the propaganda that's going around that the counties are subject to the state legislature, and that the state legislature is subject to the federal government, and that the federal government somehow is subject to this national government called the United Nations. That is absolutely atrocious. It's stupid. It's not true. It's not there. The UN has no authority over the United States. They have no authority over your sheriff. They have no authority over you unless you give it to them. And the first thing we need to do is get our country's sovereignty back and kick the United Nations out or dissolve it. And we shouldn't be in the United Nations. The United Nations was first propagandized as a means for keeping peace throughout the world, and since they've been there, there's been more poverty, which they said they were going to stop, which is absurd, but there's been more wars under the tutelage of the United Nations than at any other time in the history of the world. I think the bottom line on FEMA during Katrina is a typical example of what you get when you turn things over to the Washington, D.C. New Orleans and the state of Louisiana should have been prepared and should not have depended on FEMA to do anything. And they did, and they all paid for it dearly. And we're in a dire situation if we think that FEMA is going to take care of us in this country. They don't have a good track record. Man, here's another bureaucracy of Washington, D.C. that doesn't have a good track record. The IRS doesn't have one, the FBI doesn't have one. It just goes on and on and on, folks. So I think the warning from Ronald Reagan when he said that government isn't the solution to the problem, government is the problem, was so true, and we need to wake up to that. Well, the IRS had a hearing before Congress in 1998 where Jennifer Long and other employees, current agents of the IRS, testified that the IRS routinely fabricates evidence against citizens who they know could not adequately defend themselves, who couldn't afford to financially defend themselves against the IRS. So the end result is, through this criminal act, is that people would just pay the money. And so what happened to the IRS after that? After solid proof was given to Congress, who is supposed to oversee the IRS, what did the IRS do? Did they investigate? Did they fire anybody? Did they put anybody in jail for all these illegal and criminal acts? No, Congress said that we want IRS offices open on Saturday, and we want the IRS to be more user-friendly. That's like telling the mafia to be more user-friendly, except the mafia has a little more scruples than the IRS. Well, the EPA is mentioned in my case on page 15, and if you read Mac versus U.S., the EPA was ruled to be unconstitutional in the 1970s, and yet they have gotten more power since then. And I think that's a typical example, just like the ruling in my case of Mac versus U.S. That ruling has been ignored. And it says that state legislatures are not subject to federal direction, and that the states and the counties and local jurisdictions actually standing up to the federal government and preventing incursions from the federal government is one of the Constitution's, quote, structural protections of liberty, end quote. And it's all right there in the case. So the federal government doesn't have authority over us unless we give it to them. The Federal Reserve is probably the biggest mistake that our country has made, along with the IRS, but they kind of go together, hand in hand. They're one and the same. But the Federal Reserve is not federal. It's owned by private banks. There is no question that the Federal Reserve is owned by private banks. It's not federal. So how did we do that? Congress, you've got a lot of work to do. And yet, our representatives in Washington, D.C. pretend that it has something to do with the government and that it's all proper. It's not.
So the IRS is the enforcement arm of the Federal Reserve, okay? And so many people don't understand that. But the Federal Reserve is over a lot of these other alphabet agencies. And both sides, Republican and Democrat, point to it as justifiable and legal, and it isn't. Your Constitution clearly says there shall be no levy of tax on your earnings. It's very clear. So you can see from what this gentleman is saying how much power the sheriff actually has if they would use it. But what we have is a system that elects sheriffs, and that system is corrupted by the people who want the right person as sheriff, and not enough people like us are participating in that process. So part of the reason I'm doing this video is because I want you to get more involved locally in that process. And after this last segment here, we're going to go into a good amount of reading on some stuff that that I want to share with you today.
You know, I've been asked about 9/11 a lot. The bombing of the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. What happened then was certainly a national disaster and a catastrophe, and I hated watching that. I mean, it tore my heart out. The bottom line is I'm not going to say that I know what happened, because I don't. But what I do know is the report from the federal government is not true. And I want, more than anything, I want to call right now for an independent investigation so that we get to the bottom of it. Not another government investigation or whitewash, an independent investigation of what happened at September 11th, 2001. And I'm volunteering to be part of that. Hemp has about 2,000 domestic uses, from oil to paper to fuel. Fuel. You make fuel out of hemp. Hemp was made illegal when they made marijuana illegal. Hemp has no THC in it. It's not narcotic. And it could literally save the economy of this country. And if government officials are so concerned about global warming, then why not harvest hemp? Hemp could solve half of those problems that they're crying about all the time. Plus, the medical use of marijuana is something that absolutely should be explored. And for everybody to say, in government and police alike, oh, people just want to smoke marijuana because it's fun, or they want to get high on it. I know people who that absolutely is not true about. And if somebody's dying, then what do you care if they smoke marijuana? It's not going to hurt you, and if it makes them feel better, then more power to them. And there's one thing that the Democrats and Republicans seemingly have not understood, and that is, why don't you just leave people alone and live and let live? I don't support any of that. I don't support the drug war. After I served as an undercover narcotics officer, I started questioning the drug war. And right after the IRS, the war on drugs is the second biggest farce this country has ever come up with. So I agree with Ron Paul on almost every issue that I've ever heard him talk about. And I really had a V8 moment where when I heard Ron Paul, I did that. I go, gosh, he's so right. Why didn't I think of that? When he said, I would abolish the IRS and the federal income tax and replace them with nothing. Okay? Because if the federal government and Congress stayed within their proper parameters, they wouldn't need all this money. They wouldn't need all this money to pay for all their corruption. And we're literally paying for our own demise. And we need to stop funding the criminal who's coming after us. One thing I wanted to say about the book is that every citizen should read this because your employee needs to know about it. And your employee that we're talking about here is the sheriff. But anybody else, the deputies, when you get this book, you should always get at least one or two others. Keep one for yourself and give one to your favorite deputy or your uncle that's a police officer or your sheriff. Take it to your sheriff and make sure he understands what you and your neighbors really want him to do. It all boils down to this. Sheriff, will you stand against tyranny? Can you imagine any sheriff saying no? No, tyranny's not my job. Standing against tyranny is not my job. How bad do things have to get in this country before your sheriff says enough is enough? The monster's knocking on the door. The monster of despotism and tyranny are destroying our country. And if there was ever a time in our country's history that we should be standing against tyranny, it's now. Sheriff, I'm asking you, will you do it? If you don't, the fate of our country is in that decision. If you stand and fight against tyranny, we win. Your citizens are protected and America continues. If you do not, America dies.
So if you are interested
Read
in
the book
getting this book,
and see
it's
where you can restore freedom and liberty.
The County Sheriff, America's Last Stand, or America's Last Hope, and that's Sheriff Mack. Please, if you're interested in this information, support him. I'm going to give you the links to the videos here in the bottom. And a lot of the stuff he's saying there is very, very relevant to what we're all trying to do here, to what Q is telling us, to what the president is telling us, and to what we know to be true from our Constitution. What he was explaining there about the tax, the income tax. There is no need for a tax on our income. The Federal Reserve is taxing you on interest. Our country is supposed to be run from tariffs levied for foreign goods to come into America. That was the way the country ran up until the Federal Reserve System was initiated in 1913. Systematically, the Depression of 1929 and the Act of 1933, where they required all Americans to turn in their gold. They melted it all down, bought it for half price, and at that point it was worth $10 an ounce. They bought back for $10 an ounce. It was worth $20, and from there now you see your price of gold is at $1,700 or so, whatever. So you can see where the wealth is in all of this, and we're trying to make connections here to the oath that we took as Q, as patriots, as Americans, to our Constitution. We pledge allegiance to one another. The republic is each other. It is all of us together. And if we don't stand in our power and speak up and use the sheriff as the avenue to let our voices be heard, then I'm afraid we may not be successful in this operation. So it's very, very important that we understand a lot of this stuff. And so from here, I'm going to read a couple of these different documents. They're going to be a little bit long, but I'm going to read them to you so that you can get an idea of who we are and what civics we missed by our quote-unquote schools, teachers, and universities, and other people who pretended like they knew what your government was, when in all reality, lots of them either didn't or were intentionally misleading us. I think that that's a big deal. The Constitution for the United States of America. Thomas Jefferson, the tax which will be paid for education is not more than the 1,000th part of what will be paid to kings, priests, and nobles who will rise up if we leave the people to ignorance. He was just talking about the press, the fourth estate. You see the corruption in the fourth estate of the press. They're in the tank for the elite of the world, not the elite in America who attempt to control us. I know no safe depository of ultimate powers of the society but the people themselves. And if we think them not enlightened enough to exercise their control with a wholesome discretion, the remedy is not to take it from them, but to inform their discretion by education. This is the true corrective of abuses of constitutional power. Thomas Jefferson. The first principles of due process. The county sheriff and the U.S. Marshal are not in office to serve government servants. They are there to serve the people by guarding against government abuse. They are to make sure that the accused receive due process. If the county sheriff and the U.S. Marshal do not understand due process, they are to forthwith learn or resign. The county sheriff and the U.S. Marshal are to make sure that no warrant is executed without a sworn affidavit and a wet ink signature of a judge, without which it is no warrant and cannot be executed. County sheriff and the U.S. Marshal are to receive no prisoners that have not been indicted by a common law grand jury. Amendment 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless on a presentment or indictment of a grand jury. The county sheriff and the U.S. Marshal are to make sure that habeas corpus is obeyed, and if the court or witness fail to respond, it is the duty of the sheriff and or the U.S. Marshal to release the prisoners immediately. Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 2, the privilege of the writ of habeas corpus shall not be suspended. Due course of law, this phrase is synonymous with due process of law or law of the land and means law in its regular course of administration through court of justice. Amendment 5 of the Constitution of the United States provides no person shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. A similar provision exists in all the state constitutions. The phrases due course of law and the law of the land are sometimes used, but all three of these phrases have the same meaning that applies conformity with the ancient and customary laws of the English people or laws indicated by Parliament. Law in its regular course of administration through courts of justice is due process, Leper versus Texas. The Due Process Clause has its origin in the Magna Carta and as originally drafted, the Great Charter provided that no free man shall be taken or imprisoned or be dispossessed of his freehold or liberties, or free customs, or be outlawed or exiled, or any otherwise destroyed, nor will we not pass upon him, nor condemn him, but by lawful judgment of his peers, or by the law of the land, Magna Carta. The simplicity of law. Statutes that control men places men under the rule of other men and thereby enslaves them. Common law places men under the rule of the governor of the universe, who thereby rules over them. And the governor of the universe established his bench, which is the jury, who is to judge under his principles. Quote, men must be governed by God, or they will be ruled by tyrants. End quote, William Penn. There are two common law principles, maxims, which state that 1, for there to be a crime, there must be a victim, corpus delicti. In the absence of a victim, there can be no crime. And 2, there must be a remedy for every injury. In the third volume of the commentaries, page 23, Blackstone states 2 cases in which a remedy is afforded by mere operation of law. In all other cases, he says it is a general and indisputable rule that where there is a legal right, there is also a legal remedy by suit or action at law whenever that right is invaded. And afterwards, page 109 of the same volume, he says, I am next to consider such injuries as are cognizable by the courts of common law. Herein I shall for the present only remark that all possible injuries whatsoever that did not fall within the exclusive cognizance of either the ecclesiastical, military, or maritime tribunals are, for that very reason, within the cognizance of the common law court of justice. For it is a settled and invariable principle of the law of England, and every right, when withheld, must have a remedy, and every injury its proper redress. Marbury versus Madison. Corpus delicti, the body of a crime, the body, the material substance, upon which a crime has been committed, the corpse of a murdered man, the charred remains of a house burned down, in a derivative sense, the substance of foundation of a crime, the substantial fact that a crime has been committed. For a crime to exist, there must be an injured party. There can be no sanction or penalty imposed upon one because of this exercise of constitutional rights. And there you can see how everything about the drug war and all of this other stuff is out of bounds. The state cannot prosecute without an injured party under American common law. Common law is the law of the land. America was built on God's law, which is called natural law or common law. At law, blacks forth. This phrase is used to point out that a thing is to be done according to the course of the common law. It is distinguished from a proceeding in equity. The laws of nature and of nature's God. When in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and of nature's God entitle them, we hold these truths to be self-evident, and that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Declaration of Independence. U.S. Constitution, Article 3, Section 2, the judicial power shall extend to all cases in law. The common law is the real law, the supreme law. The code, rules, regulations, policy, and statutes are not the law. Common law as distinguished from law created by the enactment of legislatures. The common law comprises the body of those principles and rules of action relating to the government and security of persons and property, which derive their authority solely from the usages and customs of immemorial antiquity, or from the judgments and decrees of the courts recognizing, affirming, and enforcing such usages and customs, and in this sense, particularly the ancient unwritten law of England. As to the construction with reference to common law, an important canon of construction is that constitutions must be construed to reference to the common law. The common law so permitted destruction of the abatement of nuances by summary proceedings, and it was never supposed that a constitutional provision was intended to interfere with this established principle. And although there is no common law of the United States in a sense of a national customary law as distinguished from the common law of England adopted in the several states, in interpreting the federal constitution, recourse may still be had to aid of the common law of England. It has been said that without reference to the common law, the language of the federal constitution could not be understood. U.S. Constitution, Article 6, Clause 2, the Constitution and the laws of the United States which shall be made in pursuance thereof, and all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land, and the judges in every state shall be bound thereby, anything in the Constitution or laws of any state to the contrary notwithstanding. The foundation of God's law, found in Matthew 22:35-40. Then one of them, which was a lawyer, asked him a question, tempting him, and saying, Master, which is the great commandment in the law? Jesus said unto them, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, and with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like unto it. Thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. On those two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. We the people empowered the legislative branch to write codes and statutes to control money, commerce, naturalization, bankruptcies, counterfeiting, law of the sea, etc. Constitution, Article 1, Sections 6 and 9. We the people did not give Congress power to write codes and statutes to control the behavior of we the people. We the people are the master. Congress are our servants. To legislate we the people's behavior is to rule over the people. Servants do not rule over the people. The bar teaches lawyers that the common law has been abrogated, and lawyers advise all elected servants that the common law has been abrogated, and that is advocating the overthrow of the law of the land, which is the overthrow of the United States of America in violation of 18 U.S.C. 2385, advocating overthrow of government. Whoever knowingly or willfully advocates, abets, advises, or teaches the duty, necessity, desirability, or propriety of overthrowing or destroying the government of the United States or the government of any state, territory, district, or possession thereof. The county sheriff. County sheriff, conservator of the peace. The county sheriff is a constitutional officer elected by the people and bound by oath as guardian of the people's unalienable rights secured by the Constitution. The Constitution for the United States of America, its capstone, the Bill of Rights, is the law of the land, and all statutes and state constitutions repugnant to the Constitution for the United States of America are null and void if the sheriff lacks a full understanding of the Constitution, which is common law. It would stand to reason that he is vulnerable to violation of his oath, in that he may not recognize and comprehend when judges and politicians violate the common law, thus making himself technically guilty of treason. The duties, responsibilities, and authorities of the sheriff cannot be diminished by those in the legislature and courts, nor can it be diminished by any state constitution. When it comes to enforcing the law, which is to say, enforcing the Constitution for the United States of America, the sheriff, being the chief law enforcement officer, answers to we the people, no one else, not even the governor. Like any other elected official, the sheriff cannot be removed from office by another elected official. He can only be removed by the people at the ballot box, or by recall, or by an indictment from a grand jury. The United States Supreme Court says that the sheriff is the chief executive and administrative officer of a county. Chosen by popular election, his principal duties are in aid of the criminal and civil courts of record, common law courts, such as serving process, summoning juries, executing judgments, holding judicial sales, and the like. He is also the chief conservator of the peace within his territorial jurisdiction. The sheriff, being the chief law enforcement officer and the highest peace officer of the entire county in which he was elected, is under the obligation to secure the peace. He answers to the people alone, unlike the state police, who are code enforcement officers, serving the state and answering to the governor, and unlike city, town, or village police, who are also code enforcement officers serving the corporate municipalities, answering to commissioners or mayors. All these officers have a conflict of interest because they have no constitutional authority or concerns. They serve the system of codes and statutes instead of upholding the Constitution and serving the people, whereas the sheriff reports directly to the people, not the corporate municipalities, the duties, responsibilities, and authorities of the county sheriff, as a constitutional officer, are at a minimum the same as they were when the state constitutions were originally written. When a sheriff or a U.S. Marshal consults a bar judge, a bar attorney, or a bureaucrat to ask whether the judge, attorney, or bureaucrat is acting outside of his authority, the sheriff is doing something no different than consulting the fox as to whether the fox is raiding the henhouse. If the sheriff cannot ascertain whether a judge or any other government servant is abusing his power, thereby violating the unalienable rights of the people, without asking that servant whether he is doing so, how can the sheriff perform his duty? If a politician, judge, or prosecutor violates the Constitution, it is the duty of the sheriff and the U.S. Marshal to call the grand jury and ask the people for an indictment. This is the sheriff's responsibility. Were the sheriff to seek permission of a prosecutor or judge for an arrest of a politician, judge, or prosecutor whom the sheriff finds in violation of the Constitution, the sheriff would be disempowering his own authority. He would be functioning as a tool to the very ones violating the Constitution. He would thereby be violating his own oath. Obviously, then, no politician can come between the sheriff and the people. Regardless of what they have been taught, it is the duty of the sheriff to seek an indictment, not the prosecutor. Prosecutors call the grand jury when the state has an issue, but the people's business is the sheriff's business. And it is the sheriff's duty to protect the people from those who would encroach upon their rights. Likewise, the courts were designed to exist for the purpose of serving and protecting the people from criminals and tyrants. See that? Not just criminals, but also tyrants. What the sheriff needs to realize is that all cities, states, towns, and villages in America have been moving towards corporatism. That is to say, they have corporate charters, and that the police forces such as the state police, city police, town police, and village police work for the corporation, not the people. They are hired by the corporate municipality to uphold codes, not the Constitution. They are code enforcement officers, not law enforcement officers. And it is the duty of the sheriff to know when the people within his country are suffering violation of their unalienable rights by code enforcement officers. And if he fails that duty, then the county is lawless and the sheriff is to blame. The sheriff works for and answers to the people alone. His sole duty is to protect the unalienable rights of the people within his county and within the courts against police brutality, tyrannical judges, and abusive government agencies. Sheriffs rarely perform the duties that they were actually elected to exercise because they are unfortunately constitutionally ignorant. The sheriff is to make sure that due process of law is met before any arrest or seizure by police enforcement within his county. and before any executions of judgments, even a U.S. Marshal or other federal agent cannot execute a warrant of any sort within a county without first notifying the sheriff. And it is the duty of the sheriff to make sure due process of law is met before allowing a code enforcement officer, a U.S. Marshal, or federal agent to proceed. He is also duty-bound to prevent SWAT team raids against innocent, under the law code violators. Due process. Amendment 5. No person shall be held to answer for a capital or otherwise infamous crime unless a presentment of or indictment of a grand jury, nor be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. All arrest warrants must 1. Have a wet ink signature of a judge, and 2. Have a sworn affidavit attached by a witness or injured party. If there is no injured party, there is no crime. The state can never be the injured party. That is so important right there. The state cannot be the injured party. I hope everyone's understanding the significance of this. Few Internal Revenue Service liens are lawful, and yet county clerks on a daily basis file notices of lien in counties without proof of due process. Sheriffs execute them, becoming complicit in conspiracy under color of law, a crime. In order for an IRS lien to be lawful, the following documents must be served. There must be a warrant with a wet ink signature of a judge, not a stamp, an affidavit of proof of claim, i.e. an IRS Form 4490, and 3, an affidavit of proof of fiduciary relationship, an IRS Form 56. All the above must accompany the notice of lien before the clerk can file the lien and before the sheriff can act upon any such lien. All federal or state warrants must have the following. A warrant must have a wet ink signature of a judge, not a stamp, and there must be a sworn affidavit by an accusing party accompanying the warrant. Sheriffs must prevent the execution of any warrant served upon person or property by federal, state, city, town, or village code enforcement officers that do not meet the 2 requirements above. If there is no indictment, the sheriff can only hold the person for 48 hours, after which they must be released. If the arrest with or without an indictment is challenged with a habeas corpus and the party holding the person does not answer within 3 days, the sheriff must release this person. This is due process. Rarely should a person be arrested for a crime before receiving an indictment. Sheriffs should use their common sense before permitting federal and state arrests in this county without an indictment. All code violations arrests must show constitutional authority for the legislation of such codes. Any code violation that violates the unalienable rights of a person is null and void. You see that? Any code that violates the unalienable rights is null and void. An unalienable right is not the same as an inalienable right. Amendment 4, the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. There can be no sanction or penalty imposed upon one because of his exercise of any constitutional rights. The claim and exercise of a constitution right cannot be converted into a crime. A denial of them would be a denial of due process of law. If the state does not convert your right into a privilege, if the state does convert your right into a privilege and issue a license and a fee for it, you can ignore the license and a fee and engage the right with impunity. Do you understand what this means? You have a driver's license. You have a marriage certificate. You have all of these licenses that you contract with them. You're contracting with the state. You're saying, I agree to forego my God-given rights as a man, woman, flesh of God, and I would like to ask the state for a privilege. Would you please hold on to my land deed so I can pay a tax on it every year? Would you please give me the permission to marry the person that I love? Would you please give me permission to go fishing? Can I get a license for driving a car? You're asking someone for something that they have no authority to give you because you already have the right to. All town, city, and village courts are administrative courts. They are not adhering to the law of the land, i.e. the Constitution, and therefore they have no power to fine or incarcerate. Therefore, every time a county sheriff receives a prisoner from these courts, the sheriff becomes complicit in conspiracy under the color of law, a crime. When a judge violates the right of a people due to due process in court, and the sheriff does nothing, the sheriff becomes complicit in conspiracy under the color of law, a crime. When the sheriff seeks the consent of a prosecutor before arresting a judge, the sheriff transfers his duty to the prosecutor. The sheriff violates his oath, a crime. When a sheriff witnesses or receives a sworn affidavit that a judge is violating the unalienable rights of a people, the sheriff is required by his oath to arrest the judge. And if a prosecutor tries to commit felony rescue by dismissing the case, the sheriff is required by his oath to arrest the prosecutor as well. The sheriff is well served by first calling forth a grand jury to seek an indictment. Should the grand jury then issue an indictment, the sheriff is required by his oath to arrest this judge. History recalls that the grand jury was normally called by the sheriff or coroner, rarely by a prosecutor. The sheriff can call the grand jury at will and as often as he wills, and he should in order to secure an indictment upon which to base an arrest. Since legislative provisions were made for the prosecutor to call for the grand jury, over time, the state monopolized on the calling of a grand jury, and over time, the state morphed into the injured party in the name of the people, resulting today in the absence of restitution to the real injured party, thereby removing the common law maxim, there must be a remedy for every injury. Justice could mean the just collection of revenue by the state. That is not a republic, and that is not your Constitution. That is what they are operating off of. The sheriff can arrest any federal agent or police officer whom he finds violating the unalienable rights of the people. The sheriff can arrest the governor or any elected or appointed official whom he finds violating the unalienable rights of the people. If the sheriff feels more comfortable seeking an indictment before an arrest, he should do so. The sheriff's rule of thumb when it comes to knowing the authority of a judge should be American jurisprudence. Any judge acting outside of jurisprudence should be arrested for violating the inalienable rights of their victim. Constitutional officer versus a code enforcement officer. The principal challenge for the sheriff is embodied in code enforcement officers. Codes and statutes that attempt to control the behavior of people are repugnant to the Constitution and are therefore null and void. Hashtag mask wearing. Today, you're seeing this, quote unquote, they're trying to mandate mask wearing. Of course, we the people, through our Constitution, vested our legislatures at both the federal and state level to write statutes, but not statutes that violate our unalienable rights. Our Constitution never vested county, city, township, or village legislatures with statute writing powers. The sheriff has a duty to uphold the Constitution. The dilemma of the sheriff, then, in order to obey the United States Supreme Court rulings and the United States Constitution to uphold his oath, is that he must first understand the Constitution, and that is the purpose of this course. Does the sheriff have the fortitude to keep his oath to uphold the common law? Will he betray his oath and therefore the people who have entrusted him as their constitutional law enforcer? Will he uphold the common law above the will of bar-driven legislatures, judges, prosecutors, and their code enforcement officers, i.e., those who truly believe that statutes are above the Constitution? Treasonous. Bar schools have been teaching codes and statutes as law for more than 50 years. If we fail now to correct this error, America will be lost. We have a Republican form of government, a form of government guaranteed by the Constitution for the United States of America at Article 4, Section 4, which means we have a government that is mandated by our Constitution to obey the rule of law, which in our case is common law. Quote, the United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government and shall protect each of them against invasion. When an organization like the Bar advocates the overthrow of the Constitution, that is to say, the overthrow of common law, such organization is advocating the overthrow of our government and in violation of 18 U.S.C. 2385, which we read a little bit earlier. When a judge violates the Constitution, were the sheriff to seek permission from a prosecutor to seek an indictment, the prosecutor to fail to call forth a grand jury to seek such an indictment, and were the sheriff to acquiesce to this, the sheriff would be disempowering his own authority, submitting to the will of the prosecutor, breaking his oath, becoming part of the conspiracy to cover up a crime, guilty of felony rescue, a crime. When a judge breaks the law, it is the duty of the sheriff to arrest the judge and go directly to the grand jury for an indictment. It has only been recently, in the last 50 years or so, that the sheriff has been unlawfully told that he must first filter the crime through the bar-taught prosecutors who work for the state, not the people, and who almost always refuse to bring a crime before the grand jury when a state official is involved. This is exactly why America is in a constitutional crisis. Only by educating the sheriff can we, the people working with the sheriff, save America. Another obstacle, a twofold obstacle that the sheriff must recognize, is the puppet grand jury and the puppet trial jury, because these juries are controlled by the foxes, which is to say they are controlled by the judges and prosecutors. The jurors are given their guidelines upon which to deliberate by the all-controlling bar prosecutor. The jurors are instructed in the statutes and told they must follow these statutes as law. The bar prosecutor in this way is trumping common law, which of course is jury tampering or a crime. The ultimate dilemma for the sheriff is, what am I to do? The solution is simple. Take the case to the common law grand jury. Clearly, the sheriff cannot take a case involving a judge, a prosecutor, or a corporate payroll official to the unlawful puppet jury, a jury controlled by the foxes. Any government that is its own judge of and determines authoritatively for the people where are its powers over the people is an absolute government, of course. It has all the powers that it chooses to exercise. There is no other, or at least no more accurate definition of despotism than this. On the other hand, any people that judge of and determine authoritatively for the government what are their own liberties against the government, of course, retain all the liberties that wish to enjoy. And this is freedom. At least it is freedom to them, because although it may be theoretically imperfect, it nevertheless corresponds to their highest notions of freedom. We, the people, across America, in every state of the Union, are doing exactly that which we should have been doing all along. We were helped to discover these truths through the United States Supreme Court decision in which Justice Scalia, writing for the majority, made it clear the law of the land when he said, because the grand jury is an institution separate from the courts over whose functioning the courts do not preside. We think it's clear that as a general matter, at least no such supervisory judicial authority exists, and that the disclosure rule applied here exceeded the 10th Circuit's authority, rooted in long centuries of Anglo-American history. The grand jury is mentioned in the Bill of Rights, but not in the body of the Constitution. It has not been textually assigned, therefore, to any of the branches described in the first three articles. See, the grand jury is you, the people. It is a constitutional fixture in its own right. In fact, the whole theory of its function is that it belongs to no branch of the institutionalized government, serving as a kind of buffer or referee between the government and the people. Although the grand jury normally operates, of course, in the courthouse and under judicial auspices, its institutional relationship with the judicial branch has traditionally been, so to speak, at arm's length. Judges' direct involvement in the functioning of the grand jury has generally been confined to the constitutive one, calling grand jurors together and administering their oaths of office. This is the authority by which we, the people, act, and by which we come with a determination to put that fox back in its cage and save America. Now the sheriff knows, and the question before him is, are you going to continue feeding that fox, thereby participate in the treasonous acts against the people of the United States of America, or will you develop a constitutional backbone through education and join the people to bring law and order back into our courts and thereby back into our government and save America? Clearly, it takes fortitude for people to step up, take control, and do that which is right for God, country, and posterity. This is the sheriff's duty. This is the moment in time and history that will define integrity or lack thereof. We the people, under the unified United States common law grand jury, have tolerated the inaction of our sheriffs because we understand, having once been without understanding of the Constitution ourselves. We have awakened to the hard reality. We have decided to do that which is just for ourselves and for our posterity. Now our sheriffs know the choices are 1. Step up and enforce the law of the land, or 2. Resign, or 3. Prepare to face the grand jury for treason. The due time is upon us. The Constitution for the United States of America is a common law document which demands obedience to common law. Therefore, when there is a conflict between the law of the land and the statutes of the corporate charters, the Constitution must prevail. Only those statutes for which we the people have given our consent for legislatures to write are law consistent with the Constitution. Our sheriffs have now embarked upon the constitutional course of Law 101, yet it does not get any more difficult than this. A sheriff, well trained in constitutional law enforcement, can uphold the Constitution. The sheriff and his deputies have been trained in law of statute and code enforcement in technique and self-defense. Now it is the sheriff's responsibility to make sure that he and his deputies are well trained in the Constitution for the United States of America so they can serve the people. Were any of his deputies to violate the Constitution, even unknowingly, the sheriff would bear the guilt and the responsibility complicit with his deputies. The sheriff is responsible for his entire county, including the court and the jail. Wherever legislatures pass or present have removed the duties of the constitutional sheriff, claiming to have entrusted them to the code enforcement officers, the people can be sure that the common law of our Constitution is not being applied in our courts, in our jails, or in our counties. For the very nature of the system of code enforcement serves the corporate government charter, not the people. And this goes on into some other interesting things. It talks about the bailiff, talks about the jurisdiction of the courts, a little bit more. I'm going to leave the link for this at the bottom, but that gives you an overview of this document. That's about a third of this particular document here goes into the writ of habeas corpus and the understanding of liberty and how that came about. But the focal point here that I'm trying to give you guys is a little bit of understanding of a more micro understanding of your republic, because it is hidden from you. I'm going to leave the link at the bottom for this. This goes into the history of the sheriff, back to the Middle Ages, how it grew in through Europe, and why we brought this form to the republic as a protection layer for the people. The founding fathers were absolutely brilliant the way they brought this country together. Law enforcement, a sheriff always has the power to make arrests within his or her own county. Some states extend this authority to adjacent counties or to the entire state, but many sheriff's offices perform routine patrol functions such as traffic control, accidental investigations, Sheriffs still enlist the aid of the citizens, the National Neighborhood Watch Program, and sponsored by the National Sheriff's Association. We have got to start making contact with your sheriffs. We have to. That's part of what we're getting ready to do very soon, is give you guys more tools so that you can actually talk to your sheriff and feel comfortable letting them know that you feel like you're being misrepresented and the like. This will also be in the links below, the County Sheriff's Handbook. I would like for you to share this with your sheriffs. Print it out. Take it to them. Learn it. Read it. Explain to them what you mean by what you're saying. There's going to be X amount of them that aren't going to talk to you. So we're working on identifying the constitutional sheriffs, and once we have an idea of who all these people are in America that are standing up for us, then you will have a little bit better of a toehold of whether or not your particular sheriff is someone you can talk to. But I recommend that you get hard at vetting the sheriff in your county and figuring out whether or not this person stands up for you or not, because you have two major people that you will be voting for: the president and the sheriff of your county. Remember, the sheriff of your county is the president of your county. No one is above him, including the governor, state police, prosecutors, or judges. No one. He answers directly to you. It is our connection to our government, the sheriff, and the sheriff only, really, other than representatives. So I'm going to leave the link for this handbook. This is 84 pages down here below. And then also, you're going to have the link to the Constitutional Sheriffs and Peace Officers Association survey, where you can read this survey, get to understand it better, know a little bit more about what it is that should be important, and you could take this document to your sheriffs and get them to fill it out, or fill it out while you're asking them questions. Very, very important, everyone. This is the time to stand. This is the time to fight, and this is the way we fight. Your sheriffs are the key to this, the key to your Constitution, and the key to us relearning our power and beginning to stand up for each other. We have to stand up for each other, not just ourselves. And as you can see, we have this great connection to our government that most people that don't take civics or haven't been given civics even understand, that your state police or your town police or your city police are policy police, policy enforcements. They are not the same as the sheriff. They are acting out of privilege from the sheriff. The sheriffs don't understand their power. Our Constitution means something. It means something, and we have to start believing that it means something, and then we have to start acting on it. We can no longer be complicit. We can no longer sit around and say, oh, well, we'll just let the lawyers hammer it out. That's not the way this is going to work in the future. If we're going to go back to a common law scenario, if we're going to go back to the real Constitution, if we're going to go back to having real conversations like most of us want, then we're going to have to understand all of these different nuances of why and how the sheriffs aren't acting properly, and what it is we can do to get them out of office, recall them, or put pressure on them from multiple people who are standing up in your county or area. So with that, everyone, I hope you enjoyed the video. This is Shady Groove. I'm talking to you about the sheriffs and the Constitution. We've done a little bit of research here, about an hour and a half or so of stuff that you can read, reread, share with your friends. And like I said, I'm going to share the links with you below. I appreciate everyone who's coming to this conversation. I appreciate all of the people who decide to stand up for America. And if you have any questions or anything that you would like to add or ask, please feel free. My DMs are open on Twitter. And we are over at inthematrix.com with 3 X's. Please get over there to the channel on YouTube. We also have our, we have the Matrix Groove Hour every weekday at 1 p.m. And I do the Q Lounge Live every other week on Friday nights. So with that, everybody, much love out there. Stay strong, keep your head up, and start learning to fight like your president and Q has asked you to. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you think about the presentation. Much love, everybody. See you soon.